It was a hot afternoon in the year 70 AD. The Temple of Jerusalem was burning, its columns crumbling, and the sound of screams echoed through the stone streets. For the Jews, it was not just the loss of a building, but the collapse of their spiritual and national identity. It was in this scenario of desolation and chaos that Judaism and Christianity began to tread separate paths, fueling one of the most fascinating and controversial debates in religious history. Was Jesus the promised Messiah? Imagine, for a moment, the expectation of a people who anxiously awaited a leader prophesied for centuries, someone who would bring redemption and restore the glory of Israel. This hope, deeply rooted in Jewish traditions, contrasted sharply with the claims of an emerging group that saw in Jesus of Nazareth the fulfillment of these promises. But how can a humble leader, executed as a criminal, be recognized as the Savior of the world? This question resonates to this day. If we were to ask an Orthodox Jew and a fervent Christian the same question today, their answers would likely be opposite. But why? What makes the figure of Jesus so accepted by some and so rejected by others? To understand this divergence, one must look beyond the scriptures and delve into the complex web of culture, history, and theology that has shaped these beliefs. After all, religious beliefs rarely arise in isolation. They are formed by layers of context, tradition, and interpretation that intertwine over time. The promise of a Messiah appears repeatedly in the Jewish scriptures. He was to be a charismatic leader, a restorer of the kingdom of Israel, and a symbol of divine justice. For Christians, Jesus is the perfect fulfillment of these prophecies. For the Jews, however, he did not meet the fundamental criteria. He never reigned as king, did not bring world peace, and did not rebuild the temple. These expectations shape the way the Messiah should be recognized. But is the issue merely theological, or are there deeper, perhaps political reasons for this rejection? It is impossible to ignore the role that the historical context played in this separation. After the destruction of the temple, the Jews faced centuries of persecution and diaspora, strengthening their identity around cultural and religious resistance. In this scenario, accepting Jesus as the Messiah could mean giving up a carefully preserved identity. On the other hand, Christians saw the spread of their faith as the fulfillment of divine promises, reinterpreting ancient texts to validate their belief. This text goes far beyond superficial answers. Let's explore the role of the Messiah in both traditions, examine how history has shaped the perception of Jesus, and analyze the impact of divergent interpretations. More than a debate, this is a journey to understand how beliefs are formed and perpetuated. We will also investigate how historical events, such as the rise of Christianity within the Roman Empire, influenced the divisions between these religions, as well as discuss the role of the Talmud and other sacred texts in shaping Jewish opinions. Prepare yourself for an analysis that challenges perceptions and invites reflection. The question of the Messiah is not merely theoretical or theological, it carries practical implications that resonate in the interactions between religious communities. To this day, after all, the search for meaning and salvation is universal, and the divergence over who represents that salvation reveals as much about religions as it does about ourselves. Finally, I ask, is it possible to find common ground between these two seemingly irreconcilable views? The answer may surprise you. Let's get started. As we delve deeper into this analysis, it is essential to understand what, in fact, characterizes the Messiah according to Jewish and Christian traditions. The expectations for this prophetic figure have been shaped by centuries of sacred texts, rabbinical interpretations, and cultural beliefs that have guided generations of faithful. In Judaism, the Messiah, or Mashiach in Hebrew, is seen as a human leader, chosen by God to restore Israel, gather the exiles, and inaugurate an era of peace and prosperity. The prophecies point to him as a direct descendant of King David, with the responsibility of rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem and establishing a just and pious government. Texts like Isaiah 11:1-10 describe this Messiah as a wise and powerful ruler, guided by the Spirit of the Lord. On the other hand, Christianity presents Jesus as the fulfillment of these prophecies, but with a mission that goes beyond the physical and political restoration of Israel. For Christians, Jesus came to establish a spiritual kingdom, bringing redemption from sin and reconciliation between God and humanity. His crucifixion and resurrection are seen as the center of this divine plan, symbolizing the necessary sacrifice to save humanity. These fundamental differences have generated tensions since the beginning. While the Jews awaited an earthly Messiah who would bring immediate liberation, the Christians interpreted the Scriptures as a promise of spiritual salvation. This disparity, intensified with historical events such as the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, which forced the Jews to reinterpret their own messianic expectations, placing greater emphasis on the anticipation of a future leader. However, Christianity saw this destruction as a confirmation of its beliefs, interpreting it as the end of the system of sacrifices and the beginning of a new covenant through Jesus. This interpretation was reinforced by texts such as Hebrews 8:13, which speaks about the replacement of the old covenant with a new one. The difference between these views is also evident in the way both groups perceive the prophetic texts. For example, Isaiah 53, widely cited by Christians as a description of Jesus' suffering, is interpreted by Jews as a reference to the people of Israel themselves who have suffered throughout history. These distinct expectations, rooted both in theology and historical events, continue to shape current beliefs. They not only influence religious identity, but also fuel debates about faith, history, and redemption. The figure of Jesus Christ is central in Christianity, but his reception within Judaism has been marked by complex and multifaceted rejections. To understand this dynamic, it is essential to delve into the historical and cultural context that shaped perceptions of him. The period in which Jesus lived was turbulent for the Jewish people. The Roman occupation imposed political and religious tensions, and the Jewish leaders sought to preserve their identity and traditions in the face of this threat. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD marked a turning point. With the temple in ruins and the beginning of the diaspora, the Jews began to focus on religious practices centered on the Torah and the oral law. In this context, the figure of Jesus was seen as a threat to the foundations of traditional Judaism. Moreover, the growing Christian movement was perceived as a radical rupture, leading to the consolidation of boundaries between the two religions. While Christians proclaimed Jesus as the Messiah, Jews awaited a liberating Messiah who would restore the kingdom of Israel, reinforcing the theological incompatibility. The Talmud and other rabbinic texts were fundamental in preserving Judaism. After the destruction of the temple, these writings address the figure of Jesus indirectly, often portraying him as a false prophet or questioning his legitimacy. Some controversial passages have been reinterpreted by modern scholars, but they remain sources of debate. These texts helped establish theological barriers between Jews and Christians, sustaining the rejection of Jesus as the promised Messiah. At the same time, contemporary academic studies suggest that many of these narratives reflect social and political tensions of the period, rather than exclusively theological condemnations. The Middle Ages brought new challenges to the relations between Jews and Christians. Forced conversions, pogroms, and systematic expulsions reinforced the feeling of alienation between the two groups. Statistics indicate that thousands of Jews were persecuted or killed in the name of Christianity, creating deep wounds and mutual distrust. These persecutions not only solidified the rejection of Jesus, but also made interreligious reconciliation more challenging. To this day, the impact of these events is felt, raising questions about tolerance and respect among different beliefs. The rejection of Jesus by Judaism is a phenomenon shaped by centuries of history, theology, and cultural conflict. Understanding this context is crucial for promoting more open and constructive interreligious dialogues. By examining the past, we can build bridges to the future, recognizing differences while seeking points of common understanding. In this sense, messianic prophecies have been the subject of intense debates throughout history, separating Jewish and Christian beliefs in their interpretations. The analysis of key texts such as Isaiah 53, Daniel 9, and Psalm 22 reveals how these distinct visions shape the understanding of the Messiah's identity. Isaiah 53 is frequently cited by Christians as a prophetic description of Jesus. They see in the suffering servant a representation of Christ's sacrificial atonement for the sins of humanity. In contrast, Jewish traditions generally interpret this passage as a collective reference to the nation of Israel, which suffers on behalf of the nations of the world. Another debated text is Daniel 9, which presents the prophecy of the 70 weeks. Christians see in this passage a precise chronology that culminates in the death of Jesus, confirming him as the promised Messiah. However, Jewish interpretations highlight the symbolic nature of the text, relating it to the restoration of Jerusalem and the coming of a future leader, but not necessarily to the Messiah as described in the New Testament. Psalm 22 also evokes divergent interpretations. Christians identify parallels between the verses about suffering and the events of Jesus' crucifixion. The Jews, on the other hand, consider the psalm a poetic expression of the struggles and deliverances of King David, with no direct relation to the Messiah. For Christians, Jesus fulfilled the messianic prophecies in a spiritual and divine manner, offering redemption and establishing a new covenant between God and humanity. His resurrection is seen as the definitive validation of his messianic identity. The Jews, however, await a literal and physical fulfillment of these prophecies. They expect a Messiah who will bring world peace, restore the temple, and gather the exiles of Israel. This fundamental difference regarding the role and mission of the Messiah remains one of the greatest divisions between the two traditions. Advances in archaeology and linguistics have shed new light on biblical texts. Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, revealed textual variations and cultural nuances that can influence interpretations. Recent studies suggest that the Greek translations, Septuagint, used by the early Christians, may have differed significantly from the original Hebrew texts, contributing to the divergences. Messianic prophecies continue to be a fertile ground for theological and academic debates. While Christians see in Jesus the fulfillment of these promises, Jews maintain the hope for a future Messiah. With new discoveries and advances in biblical studies, interpretations can deepen, offering richer insights into these texts that span centuries of history and faith. In today's world, religious differences continue to shape the social and spiritual landscape around the globe. However, as the world becomes more interconnected, new opportunities arise for interreligious dialogue and the pursuit of mutual understanding. But how can we seize this moment to build bridges between such distinct beliefs? The global religious landscape reflects a constantly changing diversity. Recent statistics show a significant growth of Messianic Judaism, a movement that combines traditional Jewish beliefs with the acceptance of Jesus as the Messiah. On the other hand, Christianity continues to expand in various parts of the world, especially in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. These movements generate both curiosity and tension. while some religious communities see conversions as threats to cultural identity, others see opportunities for deeper dialogues. In fact, research indicates that the majority of people in pluralistic societies value interreligious respect, pointing to a growing openness to debate and collaboration. The new generations have played a vital role in redefining religious interactions. Young Jews and Christians raised in globalized environments are more inclined to explore issues of faith through cultural and intellectual lenses. Social media and digital forums provide spaces for the exchange of ideas and respectful debates, broadening the reach of these discussions. Moreover, interfaith movements have gained strength, promoting events, seminars, and social projects that unite different communities around common causes, such as social justice and environmental preservation. These initiatives create opportunities to break down historical barriers and foster understanding. Promoting respectful and constructive debates is a delicate but essential task. An effective approach involves listening without prejudice, seeking common ground, and recognizing differences without judgment. Neutral spaces, such as academic forums and non-governmental organizations, can facilitate these interactions. It is also suggested to use personal narratives to humanize the debates, connecting experiences of faith and culture. Initiatives such as interreligious exchanges and comparative biblical studies also help build trust and mutual understanding. In an increasingly pluralistic world, interreligious dialogue emerges not only as a necessity, but as an opportunity for collective learning and growth. Respect and curiosity for others can open pathways to unexpected collaborations and reconciliations. Thus, by building bridges between different beliefs, we create a future where faith can be, more than ever, an instrument of unity and peace. Throughout this journey, we explored how history, culture, and theology have shaped the divergent beliefs between Judaism and Christianity. From the destruction of the Second Temple and the formation of the first Christian communities to the distinct interpretations of messianic prophecies and contemporary repercussions, each point revealed the complex layers that sustain these traditions. What emerges from this analysis is not just a portrait of divisions, but also an invitation to mutual understanding and dialogue. History has shown us how traumatic events, such as the diaspora and medieval persecutions, created deep wounds, but also stimulated resilience and the preservation of identities. We have seen how the sacred texts, reinterpreted over the centuries, formed the theological foundations that support beliefs, both in the future coming of a physical Messiah for the Jews, and in the spiritual fulfillment of these prophecies in Jesus for the Christians. However, perhaps the most inspiring aspect of our analysis has been the emergence of modern movements that seek to promote dialogue and reconciliation. Young people and religious leaders have taken important steps to build bridges between these traditions, proving that differences can be transformed into opportunities for learning and collective growth. Despite the differences, there are reasons for hope. The new generations, immersed in a globalized and interconnected world, are more open to dialogue and collaboration. Inter-religious projects, from academic debates to joint social actions, demonstrate that it is possible to find common ground without abandoning personal convictions. This scenario offers an optimistic vision for a future where faith can be a tool for unity instead of division. Given this, we invite you to continue exploring these issues with an open mind and heart. Ask, investigate, and be willing to listen to different perspectives. Allow yourself to question your own beliefs and see them from new angles. More than ever, we need respectful dialogues that challenge prejudices and promote empathy. Whether in a casual conversation, an in-depth study, or an interreligious event, each step towards mutual understanding is a step towards peace. After all, it is in the exchange of ideas and experiences that we find the seeds for a more tolerant and harmonious world. May this reflection not end here. May it serve as a starting point for a continuous path of learning and growth. After all, when we embrace diversity and choose dialogue, we discover that differences do not need to separate us. They can, on the contrary, enrich us.